This is Bosch's 18 volt 165mm cordless saw. It's a pretty cool little saw. I've been using it for about a week now, trying it out in various tasks, and we're going to go through and talk about the saw, what I like about the saw, what I don't like about the saw, and we'll also do a few tests, ripping some LVLs, cutting some timber, and get a good look at the saw. Now, first impressions, the very first thing I noticed is how long this saw is. It's a very unusual shape. I've just got this Makita saw to compare it to, because most battery 165mm saws are similar to this. They're quite small, but where the Bosch differs is the Bosch is longer than them, but it's also compacted so it's not as wide. Personally, I think it is pretty cool, the design and the build of the saw. One big disadvantage I've noticed though is when I'm trying to cut, this handle at the front really blocks the line of sight of trying to see through at where the blade hits the timber. Obviously, if I'm using my left hand, if it's on this side of my body, I can see perfectly fine. If I'm using it this side, there are ways you can move around to be able to sight where your blade's hitting the timber. I've just noticed that to be a little bit awkward. And another massive thing about the build of the saw, probably the biggest letdown of the saw, is that there's no rafter hook at all on it. When you get a small 165mm saw like this, one of the key benefits of a small cordless 165mm saw, like these two here, is that they're light and they're easy to carry up with you onto the roofs. If you're working in the roofs, you're doing trusses, doing rafters, and if that's the case, you want to be able to hook them onto the rafters when you're working. You can see this Makita saw does have the rafter hook, and honestly, every other saw I do own has that rafter hook as well. So I'm definitely looking at this in a trade perspective, a carpenter's perspective. These Bosch tools are also great for DIYers, and that's not going to be an issue you have if you are a DIYer. You're not going to be up on a roof having to hook it over a bit of timber. So the fact that it doesn't have that rafter hook makes me think that Bosch really are looking at the DIYer when they do make the saw. A few other things I noticed. One isn't a big deal, but the base plate is longer down here than other 165mm saws. That means if I'm trying to cut a bit of timber and I'm cutting it up to a surface, I can't do as deep of a cut as other saws can. That's something I actually did experience when I was doing a bit of work on the weekend. It's going to be something that doesn't happen often, and when it does happen, it's still not that big of a deal. Regardless, if you can't cut all the way, you're going to get a recip out to finish off the job, but it does help out if you can do more of a cut with a saw blade. One thing I do love about it is when we're trying to do our bevel cuts at the front here, it is very neatly and easily displayed to find our degrees. It's also very easy to move that base plate back and forth to get the angles that we need. And something I did notice is when I did try to cut an angle cut, our saw guard didn't get stuck. It seamlessly moved up and just let us cut the timber freely. There are some saw brands I have used. I can't remember which brands do it, but there are quite a few that when you're trying to do a cut, especially on an angle, the saw guard keeps getting stuck in the way. While you're here, Mitchie, did you have anything that impressed you or pissed you off about the saw? I'd love to know.
I really like the longer base plate.
You like the long base plate? Why is that? Do you find it's easier to rip or cut, or do you use the marks at the front of your base plate when you cut?
At the start, I do, yeah.
Okay, so I've got Mitch here too.
That's before I look at the blade.
Is that when he brings the saw to the timber, he holds the saw there for a second and makes sure it's not on an angle. He's making sure it's square with the timber. Yeah, it's just, he said he really likes the base plate. It's easy to check to make sure the saw is square with the timber. And then once he gets that square, he's just going to keep moving it forward evenly. That's something I've never done. Whenever I've checked my saw for square with the timber, I'm always like looking through this base plate across here and making sure the angle looks like it's 90 degrees. That's a really smart way to look at that base plate through there. And since it does have depth, it is really close to the other side of a 90/45. So yeah, you can see how much is left on the timber. Yeah, so your blade's hitting the timber there. So you can easily see, like out of square, you can easily see when that is even. Yeah, it's a good little pickup. I like that. Yeah, it's good. I like asking other people's opinions because I feel like everyone uses tools differently. Like, I don't do it that way, as we just found out then. No, there's not. But then,
as long as you get it done.
You're right, but there might be people watching this video that do it a similar way to you, and that information could really resonate with them. Go, oh, cool, this saw's going to be good. My initial thoughts when I unboxed this saw is I was really blown away, really impressed by it. I think the only thing that's left is let's get cutting and let's see how it goes. All right, so this will be our first little test. This is an LVL, so it is it's a hard timber to cut through, 45mm thick. And we're just going to see how this goes. I'll check the battery. The battery is on 1 bar. Let's get a better battery before we start this. All right, so that's a bit better. Let's just take her for a spin and see how she goes cutting through the soft cut. So it does struggle. I purposely did try to go through pretty quick to start with, and I knew that was going to happen. It happened when we did it in the test. It almost seems like the battery is going to be dead. And well, the battery is on 1 bar now. We'll do it again with another battery. This was on 2 bars when we started it though. But we had the exact same thing happen, where if it's starting to struggle too much in the timber, it just keeps jamming up and switching off. What I'll do for the second cut is I'm just going to go through and go very slowly, and I'll show you I'll show you an example of how slow we need to move the saw to be able to rip this LVL. It feels like it's way too slow. It feels like I just want to go quicker and try to push the saw a little bit faster. But that is the speed you have to move the saw at so that it doesn't jam up and it doesn't stop. It is quite slow to rip an LVL. I will say though that any 18-volt saw is going to be quite slow ripping LVLs. So Mitch has actually started to get out corded saws. He's using that Makita 18-volt saw, the one we're looking at a second ago. And as I said, it's great when you're running around and you need a saw with you, you're moving it around. But when he's sitting down and he's cutting beams all day, cutting rafters, he's getting the corded saw out now. And I think that's a wise idea. If you got a saw like this, you're not going to be using it to do heaps of rips like that. We can see that if you had to, you can do the rip. It is just going to take a long time. Got a bit of 90-35 here now. We'll just do a few quick cuts to see how it handles with a bit of timber that you probably want to be cutting with this saw. One thing I do love is just how easy this saw guard does move back. It's very smooth. I'm going to change the angle of this. I'm going to cut a cut at roughly 30 degree. And what I want to look at when we do this is just how seamless and easy the saw guard moves back. And the fact that that moves back so seamless when you're doing those angled cuts is massive. Sometimes doing cuts like that can be a nightmare because you're trying to line your saw up, make sure everything's straight, smooth, you're good to go, hold the timber, and then you have to reach over with your other hand and pull up your saw guard so that it doesn't get caught, it doesn't get stuck. So I'm really happy with that. Overall, it is designed really well. I really like the design of the saw. The only two things it's really lacking is that rafter hook and a little bit of guts when it's doing those rips.